What's up, everybody? It's your boy Carson for FantasySports.com. Today we're about to break another course breakdown. Bye-bye, I'm out of here.
What's up, everybody? Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there as we wrap up another U.S. Open week on a Father's Day. Had to bring Carson in for the intro. He's super excited to be part of the video series. And as usual, it's your boy DFS Jimmy breaking down the early week course preview for FanshareSports.com. If you're not already a member, make sure you get over to FanshareSports.com. Check those guys out. Number one in ownership projections. Lots of great articles. Lots of great content, great database over there, as well as football season coming up. Cannot beat FanShare's ownership projections for football either. So make sure you get over to FanshareSports.com. Check those guys out. In the meantime, we are going to get into TPC River Highlands, situated just outside Cromwell, Connecticut. It is a par 70 course, very much an old-style Parkland course. It is a Pete Dye design. As you see behind me, lots of shaved areas around the greens. Fairway bunkers definitely encroach on the landing zones here at Cromwell or in Cromwell at TPC River Highlands. Annually, one of the easier courses on the rotation, definitely one of the shortest courses, averaging just over 6,800 yards, and really very much an opportunity type of golf course. The site of Jim Furyk's 58. If that tells you anything, really anybody that is in form can compete on a golf course like this. It is very much an equalizing golf course as far as the tour is concerned, with regard to the fact that you do not have to be a bomber to compete on a track like this. Brings a lot more opportunity and a lot more of the players into the fray with regard to DFS selection. Generally speaking, we have some pretty solid ball striking winners at tracks like this. Bubba Johnson, two-time winner here, and that speaks to the difference in the type of player that can win here. Bubba obviously not known for his consistency off the tee or into the green, but a very creative ball striker, and when he is on, can certainly take advantage of his creativity off the tee with regard to a lot of the dog legs that are around here. Find himself in great position with short wedges into relatively flat greens. There's only 4 water hazards on the course, 69 bunkers. Again, very much an old style course, very gettable. So, as usual, we're going to take a look at the scorecard, and we are going to take a look at course history as well as what my model looks like for the week. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the scorecard. Like I said, par 70 averaging over just over 6,800 yards, averages a half stroke under par per round. One of the easier courses on tour, as I mentioned. Last 3 holes do pose a bit of a challenge for the players this week as they try to close out their rounds. 15 very short, very gettable. Quarter of the field is going to put a score up here, if not a few more. But the remainder of the holes, 16, 17, and 18, a tough par 3, a short but tough par 4, and then a medium length par 4 that gives you everything you really want to close out a round. So a lot of opportunity at the end of a round for guys to surge and or fall apart depending on, kind of where they're at, but makes for an interesting finish and usually makes for a great golf tournament. So annually, one of the more highly attended golf tournaments as well, being just outside of Cromwell, heavily populated area. I believe that the Waste Management Phoenix Open is the only other venue that exceeds the annual attendance that Cromwell does. So and put on a great fan experience there, and annually one of the better closing stretches of a golf course. As we scroll down here and we look at how the points are going to be distributed, and that's really what we're concerned about is DraftKings points. This is very much a par 4 golf course. There are only 2 par 5s, one below 550 yards, one above 550 yards, both very gettable, but with the lack of opportunity, par 5 scoring is not really where you want to focus your attention this week. Definitely want to focus your attention on the mid-range par 4s, 400 to 450 yards. Nearly half of the golf course is comprised of those holes. They make up just over 40% of all DraftKings points on average at this type of event. So It's not a bomber's track by any stretch of the imagination. It is very much a find the fairway so you can find small greens and convert a close wedge type of golf course. The par threes are testing here, a couple of them over water, two of them over the 200-yard mark. Definitely do come into play despite not being significant contributors to DraftKings points, although this less than 200-yard par threes do contribute slightly more DraftKings points than the lone sub par 550-yard par 5. So par 3 scoring can be a factor here, but by and large, this is a par 4 golf course, and 62% of all your DraftKings points will come from the par 4s this week. So that's where you really want to be structuring your player pool selection. Par 5s here, as I mentioned, very much gettable. We'll see plenty of eagles depending on course setup and saturation. This is absolutely the type of golf course that players can go in a sub 60 type of setup. We've seen it a couple of times on this track, several 59s, and of course Furyk 58. Hell, I think Cantley shot a 60 here as an amateur. So we'll take a look at my model here in a minute, and you'll see why Cantley's name comes up as highly as it does. But safe to say, very much a birdie fest. Looking for guys that are in form or great par 4 scores. Do not need to have the strokes gained off of the tee that you do in most events on the PGA Tour. So let's get into the cheat sheet. Let's look at the course history here. As I mentioned, Patrick Cantlay, shooting a 60 as an amateur, is the number 1 ranked golfer in my model this week. And no real surprise, put together a pretty solid U.S. Open performance. Not what some thought with regard to his ability to win a major coming into it, but great performance by Cantlay. Expect nothing less coming off of a strong performance that last week for him to repeat his 15th or better from 2018. Bubba Watson, 2-time winner here, missed the cut 2 years ago, but absolutely a Bubba track despite, kind of the other players in this top echelon. Bubba is sort of the exception with his creativity, with his erratic shots off of the tee. But Bubba likes this track, likes to play in the Northeast, and, it definitely has a comfort level here. When you look at the rest of the golfers in the top part of my model, Brooks Koepka, Paul Casey, Mark Leishman, Justin Thomas, Keegan Bradley. Keegan, a native of the Boston area and the Northeast, always likes to play here, and he's put together some mediocre performances, but always seems to make the cut, and definitely has upside with his new putting stroke this year. Paul Casey, the best overall course history, and that speaks to the type of course we're at, folks. This is very much a pure ball striking golf course. Finding the fairways is not that difficult. Many players will not even need to hit driver on most of this track. So it's really about approaches and putting, and if your approaches are good, you don't even need to be that great of a putter. Mostly POA and new around here. There is maybe some bent grass left, but the POA is kind of taken over, it looks like. But it is traditionally a mix of bent and POA. I kind of categorize this track as one of the equalizers because anybody that's in good form and hitting the golf ball well at the professional level can find success here. And I think you'll see that as we scroll down through some of these players. But the pure ball strikers, like your Jim Furyks, like your Paul Caseys, these real good long iron players, tend to have the most consistent success around this track. But DFS success is built around finding lightning in a bottle, and there certainly is plenty of that to be had with any informed golfers, especially informed golfers that excel on the mid-range par 4s. Those folks can always have a good week at a track like this. Chaz Reavie actually coming off of a really strong U.S. Open performance, likes to putt on the POA anew, exceptional long iron ball striker, ranked 7th in the model this week. Not that surprising. I will probably have several shares of Chaz Reavie this week. Despite his lack of high finishes here, definitely have the upside with Reavie, as we saw in the early part of last season. Torched some really tough golf courses and some really big fields. No problem going with what is likely going to be a very cheap Chaz Reavie in a field like this. Mark Leishman, interesting. Not necessarily my cup of tea. Paul Casey disappointed many this week. I'll be getting right back on the wagon with Paul Casey. Exceptional course history, model based on course and hole length. Loves him, so I'll definitely be getting on Paul Casey, despite what's likely going to be a higher price tag than I'd like to pay. Kevin Streelman, interesting in the model at 11th, has been a former winner here, 2014. A couple of miscuts, and then another really solid performance. Again, speaks to the long iron ball striking required to find success at TPC River Highlands. Cam Smith, not really sure what the model sees. Definitely some good course history, but the last 50 rounds have been a bit rough. Not sure I'm going to go there. Absolutely the type of course we would look for a Daniel Berger to play well at. Excels on those mid-range par fours. Really the bread and butter of his game, and would not be surprised to see Berger putting together a solid week. Obviously, the model likes Tommy Fleetwood. Tommy Fleetwood's one hell of a golfer. Tommy Fleetwood's never played here, coming off slightly disappointing U.S. Open, where many thought he'd play a bit better, but I wouldn't fault anybody for loading up on Fleetwood this week in what is likely going to be somewhat suppressed ownership, especially given his lack of course history and perceived lack of form coming in, although I don't really think that he is lacking form. I think that's more of the public overreading things or reading too far into it. Brian Harman, absolutely a track for a guy like Brian Harman. Again, I mentioned an opportunity type of golf course. Find the fairway so you can find the green, don't need to hit driver. Brian Harman excels in courses like that. CT Pan, absolutely. So it very much agree with my model in the top 20 here. Tony Finau should have a good go at this, very much like Bubba approaches the course with a power standpoint. This is one of the older style courses that can be had through some power off of the tee. So would not be surprised to see one of those bombers in the top 5 this week, despite the lack of necessity for strokes gained off of the tee for success here. When we get down a little bit further, though, some interesting names pop up that I think are going to be polarizing targets for DFS this week. One, Anirban Lahiri, despite where he ranks in my model, I don't think a ton of people are going to go to him, even though he has fairly exceptional course history here the last 2 years, 2 top 20s and a top 10. Hard to peg a guy like Lahiri. Exceptional ball striker, plays well on these shorter technical tracks where he doesn't have to hit driver and compete on length. Remember Lahiri coming from India, coming from the tight tracks of the Indian Tour and the Hero Tour, and then working his way through. Very much a style of course for Lahiri, but his form is always in question. Jordan Spieth, former winner here, definitely has his game back together. Be interested to see where the market lands on Spieth this week. I'll hold my judgment until probably Tuesday or Wednesday night to see where ownership shakes out. If he's super chalky, probably want none of him. If people are looking past him because he's a whiny baby and they're cheering for Greller now, if you didn't see that video online, you should definitely check it out. But if Spieth's kind of sentiment is down on FanShare this week, I'll definitely be interested as a contrarian play. Russell Henley, likely going to find some chalk in Russell Henley this week. It seems like every time I'm on him, he burns me, and when I'm not, he plays well. So whatever stance I take on Henley later in the week, you should probably take the opposite. Otherwise, the last high-tier player I kind of want to touch on, the model doesn't really like him. He's in his own head, has mentioned several times in recent interviews that he's mentally scarred from poor golf shots. I'm not really sure what that's like. Welcome to the real world, pal, and the rest of us hacks out here playing around to golf. We're all scarred by our bad shots. We get over them. You should too. Tighten down the funny cap and get back to work. That's kind of my sentiment on DeChambeau right now, but that said, he's also the type of golfer that can snap right out of it, and with continually improving performances, 47th, 26th, then a 9th his last 3 years, very much the type of track that I think a Bryson could excel on if he can get out of his own head. So be interested to see what some of the pre-round interviews are for Bryson this week, but overall, I think he will be your low-owned stud and likely GPP target for your Sharks this week is Bryson DeChambeau. Another course history guy that is going to be polarizing this week, Charlie Hoffman. Exceptional course history here at this track. Proven winner on tour. Extremely consistent year over year, but I'll tell you, he's really struggled since dropping the weight, as many golfers have. Congrats to Charlie for getting healthy and dropping the weight, but it definitely has affected his golf game, and he's still trying to find that consistency he had through the last 3-4 years in his career. So Hoffman likely to be a popular but polarizing choice this week based on course history and versus his kind of shaky current form. Shout out to Pat Mayo, absolutely a Siwoo Kim course, couple of top 25s last couple of years. Siwoo Kim always tough to peg, but when he's on, the guy makes birdies like no other. This is absolutely a boat race. Don't sleep on a Siwoo Kim share or two. That said, guys, like I mentioned, you're going to see a lot of mixed performances past this point, and that has to do with the fact that it's a short course, lots of opportunity out there. You find the fairway, you find the green, you make some birdies. I've said it several times in this podcast, and it is going to remain true. So anybody that's hot, can get going here. So don't be afraid to take some shots down the board. For anybody that you find that's in form, your top stud with no course history is going to be Tommy Fleetwood. So your two polarizing choices for studs: Bryson DeChambeau, Tommy Fleetwood, Jordan Spieth is definitely in that conversation, depending on where the market shakes out after this week's U.S. Open. But with that, guys, your boy DFS Jimmy signing off for Carson. Best of luck. Have a good week. See you next week.